when they actually had a legal restriction for the indigenous population to grow amaranth. So you can't grow amaranth, you got to eat whatever I provide you. And history of the buffalo, same thing. Buffaloes were actually slaughtered wholesale once the railroad went through. And part of that was clearly as, for lack of a better term, biochemical type of warfare. You take away the whole root of substance of an entire nation and disrupt their whole way of life. Also, the whole environment, due to later, farm factory, industrial types of farming and everything that came into play, you ended up destroying the native flora and fauna. So you have overfishing. We have the records of people who first came in terms of from Europe here. They're writing back to Europe in terms like, I'm looking into the river and I can just reach in and grab fish. That's how teeming and how just so much abundance of fish and different types of things were here that they were writing back. And this is also what is not talked about many times, is that Europe at that time was also going through a heavy famine phase. And so one of the big things that got shipped back to Europe was salted fish. Salted fish, salted beef. Once they figured out that corn could be used as a cheap feed, cattle and pigs were that's where the meat industry had its root at. So these are the foundations. This is why the American kind of structure, the standard American diet is different than the world, because these things fed it. We had the creation of monocrops. So you're basically just stripping the soil till it can't produce anymore. And then also these invasive species. So especially on the East Coast, many of the native tribes didn't have anything like fences around their gardens. But once you let pigs in the wild, they're going to wreck everything. So they destroyed, these particular farms and gardens of the native nations, and they literally are invasive species. The freaking Norway rat. These are invasive species that destroy the whole foundation that was here already laid in America. I jumped. All right, don't do missionary veganism. All right, I'm gonna tell you as a person, color, black man, that does not work. And it caused me to go through figuring out a couple of things while I was growing up. Because I realized that I probably should eat less meat, but I didn't have kind of like a framework or kind of like a picture of where I wanted to go with it until I started researching and stuff for everything else. All right, it's the worst stereotypes of New Age, hippie, influencer culture, whatever you want to call it. I just was speaking to Vanessa about a raw vegan influencer that was online who just was crying because she got caught eating fish, So all her followers and stuff, are attacked here and stuff. But that's her business now, So that doesn't reach the communities that need to hear the message in terms of how to incorporate more plant stuff into their diet. It's also, it blinds you from, like I said, we don't just pour in, we draw out. It blinds you from plant-based narratives within indigenous and black communities that already exist. And it gets hyper-focused on the individual. So you're sick because you eat wrong, versus seeing how that person is hooked into the larger community and hooked into the larger people around them. And it's also claims no speciesism. This was what I fought with a lot growing up, with groups like PETA and stuff like that. On one hand, they would say, everybody's equal, all animals and everything's equal, all equal. But when, a black kid got shot by the cops, they weren't out there. So it was like, no, you actually think that animals are more important. And for those, Tim White is a white anti-racist speaker who speaks like, he coined a term called animal whites. And that term is basically focusing, talks about vegans who focus primarily on the rights of animals well, and not intersecting with other social justice issues. And for those for a little history, PETA, for the ethical treatment of animals, they had, a little hard time here in New Haven at one time. They came through and they wanted to appropriate visual pictures of slavery and line them up against dogs.
Wow.
Yeah, they got kicked out that one time. They got kicked out. And they also the same thing happened though. It happened in Europe also. They did the same thing to try to appropriate, the visual imagery of the Holocaust and line it up against them. And all I'm saying is that you're not going to reach anybody that way. We're not listening. Okay, it's not going to happen. And that shock value is literally, I line that up with missionary because that is really what happened in terms of colonization. I'm going to come in here. I know what's best for you. This is what's best for you. Do it. If you don't do it, there will be repercussions. And that's the same way many people in terms of veganism, approach it. There's going to be repercussions, if you don't do this. They don't listen to that anymore. All right. 1491, great book, by the way. It talks about, America before Columbus. Turtle Island, that's just the North America part. Not all the native nations refer to North America as Turtle Island, but it's one of the more common terms that's utilized. It was primarily plant-based, so you're not introducing anything new. It was primarily plant-based. Yes, there were particular tribes and nations that were strongly nomadic and made in terms of those that were like centered around buffalo, or when you go further up north with the Inuit, so-called Eskimo, their diet is pretty much centered around seals and whales and sea life. But overall, plant-based. Like I said, no big domesticated animals. So you don't have the byproduct in terms of, Vanessa was pointing out, the manure swamp, when you don't have a huge group of domesticated animals. Yeah. They're scientists in agriculture. I mean, and I just want to emphasize, aquaponics, in Mexico, they were doing it. They had islands, where they literally grew their food, aquaponics. On the right, the furthest right is actually the ancestor of corn as we know it today. It literally was almost just like a small shoot of grass with a couple of seeds on it. They actually engineered that over a period of hundreds of years, thousands of years, to get all the varieties of corn to the right, the bottom right, those are all kernels of corn, that we have nowadays. If we can't learn anything from them, then we don't know how to learn. All right, that right there, and to the bottom left, you have tubers right there. So that's, diversity that you have in potatoes. Once again, if you haven't seen all these different types of potatoes, this reflects also the issue that we have in terms of everything I'm talking about. Diversity. If you only have one way to talk to people about, building up a plant-based diet, then you're only going to have a white potato. All right? We like sweet potatoes, okay? We like sweet potatoes. We like, if you ever had the purple potato, anybody here Filipino? If you had the Filipino, the dessert you make with the purple tomato? Come on. I mean, purple tomato, the purple potato. Oh, tomatoes too. Scientists. But diversity is good. It is good. It actually promotes, a healthy system. Dynamic system. What am I talking about? So, I wanted to point out, this is one dimension in terms of how plant-based eating enters into American history. All right, so if anybody studied religion, they basically have mapped out 3 great awakenings that happened. All right, the 3rd great awakening, we can go into specifically what happened with them, but the only one that's really important right now is the 3rd great awakening, which is pretty much after the Civil War, during Reconstruction, all the way into like the early parts of last century. And so what happened during that time is that instead of just a lot of Christian denominations coming into existence, you had a lot of utopian, Eastern influence religions in America taking root. And I'm gonna skip down to number 3. And the reason that they happened is because the World's Columbian Exposition, which is basically the World's Fair, and it was a 400-year anniversary of Columbus coming in Chicago happened. But at that fair, the World Parliament of Religion had their first meeting. And at this meeting, what happened was, you didn't just have people come who were Christian. This is when you have the first influx into the Americas of people who were Hindu, people who were Buddhist, you know, people who were various different, like I said, Far Eastern religions, Far Eastern practices, first coming into America, all right? And Americans as a whole being exposed, all right? And so this is also influenced the creation of some of these utopian societies. And guess what a lot of these societies all have in common? You're being influenced by the East. All of a sudden you have vegetarianism, veganism, different forms of plant-based eating starting to enter into the American consciousness during that time. All right. And then you have my man up here, Henry Kellogg, who, you know, they don't make it anymore, but my favorite cereal was Special K. Okay, if you remember Special K, then you're a real one. All right. But Henry Kellogg, you know, invented basically, you know, cereal and everything. And he had, there's also that film, the water film about him, but talking about the water therapy farm that basically opened up, where doing different, you know, enemas and different things, and basically baths and water, using water to heal. But he was very, very influential also in creating a form of mock meat during this time. So one of the earliest forms of mock meat were actually created by Henry Kellogg and another man who I'm going to talk about a little later, a very important man. But he also, Henry Kellogg, the reason why he was influenced in terms of to make this mock meat is because he was a Seventh-day Adventist. All right. The Depression and around the 2 world wars. You don't really think of that time as like plant-based eating stuff popping off. But because of the scarcity of the war, different things were put into place. So you had like Meatless Monday happening. You had like Wheatless Wednesday happening. You had victory farms happening. People started planting food and growing food themselves. You know, and like I said at the bottom, this all the Great Awakening that happened. Also, the second phase came to the 50s and 70s that most people are familiar with. You know, in terms of, you know, Buddhism, Hinduism, martial arts. You know, all that tied together. So these are other avenues that you can start to talk to people about, you know, incorporating more of this stuff into their diet. Okay, real quick, I'm going to talk about soul food because I always have an issue with it. I have an issue with the propaganda behind it. Okay, and I'm going to talk about the demonization of soul food. Okay, soul food today is a variant of the traditional black cuisine. All right, of the South. All right. Usually the way that it's presented to people is you eat soul food, black people eat soul food, that's what they say. All right. The reality is that soul food as it's presented today, first of all, the majority of black people in the hood, we don't eat soul food like that every day, all day. All right, the majority of people, black people that I know in the hood, actually eat more fast food than they eat traditional soul food. All right, that's the real core crux of the issue, food apartheid issues. Also, other things are into play. You know, we're now more sedentary. We sit down more. You know, and every group that's an immigrant group that comes to America in the land of plenty, you know, usually making probably a little more money than you made, you know, in what your particular homeland is. You pretty much eat whatever comfort food is from your culture more when you get to America. And so what happens is that you will find this within every group that comes to America. It's not just freaking black people in America that their food, you know, is tied to their health. You know, so I was talking to someone from Eastern Europe who said that, yeah, when we got here in America, we were just eating our food like 3 times a day, but we might have only ate it once a week. You know, so you get to buy those comfort foods you couldn't get anymore. You know, so every group is impacted, all right? But it's kind of like this demonization, once again, on soul food, because it wants to talk about just like, yeah, you guys are just you got issues, you guys can't control your eating, and therefore this is why you're sick. And also, like I said, Soul food, as you see in this plate, is also it's like just a small cut of what traditional black cuisine is. And I'm talking about traditional Southern black cuisine. All right, traditional Southern black cuisine is varied also, depending what regions you come from in the South. There are some things that people eat in Kentucky that they don't eat on the Georgia seacoast. You know, and there's also those other things that never get mentioned in the talks about soul food. If I was to do a questionnaire about what do you think soul food is, probably the same 10 items will come up. You know, but my father, who was from rural Kentucky, he ate some things that I would never eat. All right? Actually, I did, you know, when I used to eat meat, I ate some of it, but we won't talk about it. But yeah, like he ate squirrel, he ate possum, you know, stuff like that. You know, yeah, rabbit, you know, pheasant, greasy pheasant. Water birds are greasy. That's all I go to when I talk to people about that on plant-based. Like, what do you eat? I'm like, what do you eat? You know, because the reality is that I probably eat more different types of meat than people who still eat meat now. People probably eat, you know, eat pretty much the same 5 meats or 6 meats or whatever. But those are left out of the talk, you know, when we're talking about soul food. You know, people always talk about fried chicken, chitlins, and ribs. No. And so, taking away the meat aspect, the traditional black American diet is plant-based. It's plant-based. There's a whole lot more freaking plants that are included in the traditional black diet than any type of meat, all right? This actually picture is from a spot in Oakland. If you go there, Soulfully Vegan, yeah, it's good. They have some real good fried okra. They're the spot. But, so I want to also talk real quick. There's a spot online, veganstreet.com. Great site, I like it. They have these posts up, right? The vegan flavors of Italian food, the vegan flavors of Greek food, the vegan flavors of Irish food. And I kept looking and I couldn't find any for me. There wasn't the vegan flavors of black American food. There wasn't the vegan flavors of any Caribbean group. I was like, are you kidding me? You found vegan flavors in Irish food. It's not a slight against the Irish. I'm just saying, you went all the way in and found vegan flavors in Irish food, and you couldn't do one for a day in Puerto Rico? So, it's not as clear, but I went and did something. All right. So I wanted to start off with pretty much the mother, which is West Africa, because the vegan flavors of freaking West Africa. You know, like, why wouldn't you have the vegan flavors of West Africa? You have cassava. If you haven't had cassava, you need to have it in your life. Palm nut, peanut. If you're drinking Coca-Cola, the cola nut. Sorghum. Oh, wow. Okay. It's tactile to me, it's really good. And then we're going to go to Puerto Rico. You know, come on now. We're going to go into, once again, yuca, cassava, you know, sofrito, you know, pigeon peas, you know, malanga, you know, papaya, you know, salsa. And then I did the vegan flavors of the Black American South. You know, you got okra, you got sweet potato. Kush is actually one of the ancestors of corn stuffing in the Americas. Once again, only a certain region in the South. If you ain't from that region, you wouldn't know. All right? Hot peppers. I put hot sauce up there. It's vegan. But it's one of those things, once again, like if you want to talk about vegan flavors, we're going to talk about vegan flavors. We're going to talk about grits, we're going to talk about black eyed peas. We're going to talk about pot liquor, which, if no one knows, pot liquor is that good stuff. So if you cook the greens, right, you cook them down, you cook them down. Right? At the bottom, the left, the boiling with the residue is that pot liquor, right? That's where all the flavor and the savory and the nutrients are. So we didn't just eat the greens and everything. You actually will also, you know, sip on that pot liquor or pour it over your cornbread and dip it and stuff in that. All right? Once again, the more you learn about the people who you are going to service in terms of health, the easier job will be. You know, if you don't know the cuisine of the people who you are setting out to